When my son submitted his college application, I wasn't listed as his guardian. His stepmother was. For 19 years, I had been there. Not perfectly, not always, but I was the one who paid for his braces, who stayed up through the night when he had the flu, who taught him how to ride a bike on a cracked driveway in a house I mortgaged alone. And yet, when it mattered most, my name was gone, replaced. By the time I found out, it was too late. The paperwork had been signed, filed, processed. "It's just a technicality," Cheryl had said, with her signature smile. Lucas thought it'd be simpler this way. But I wasn't stupid. Simplification doesn't erase a father. It reassigns loyalty. What followed broke something in me that hadn't cracked, even when my wife died. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just started reading. Emails, messages, threads between my wife and her friends. And that's when I saw it. The truth I'd refused to entertain. Cheryl hadn't just replaced me in the paperwork. She had been replacing me in my son's heart for years. Before I take you through this story of betrayal so quiet it could pass for peace, I need you to do one thing. Stay. Because this isn't just about a father losing a title. It's about what happens when the people you trust most rewrite your worth while smiling at your face. And how sometimes the coldest revenge is simply walking away, knowing they'll never get another piece of you. My name is James Whitmore. I'm 52 years old, retired from a 2-decade career as a structural engineer. I spent my life calculating the integrity of buildings, ensuring that foundations held firm even under the greatest stress. Ironically, I failed to apply those same principles to my own family. When my wife Allison passed away from ovarian cancer, our son Lucas was just 5. One moment, we were planning a weekend hike, and the next, I was holding her hand as her body grew cold. She was the glue, the warmth, the laughter in our home. And with her gone, the walls didn't just feel empty. They felt irrelevant. I didn't handle it well. I did what men of my generation often do. I threw myself into work. Early mornings became earlier. Weekends vanished into blueprints and project deadlines. Lucas stayed with my parents most weekdays, and when he was home, I was usually at my desk, drafting out steel frameworks for high-rises I never even got to see completed. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, with every cell in my body. But I convinced myself that love looked like security, that showing up in his bank account was just as good as showing up at his soccer game. When I missed his second-grade play, I bought him a new gaming console. When I forgot his 12th birthday, I gave him a check and let him pick his own gift. I was always trying to compensate, to balance the scales with decimal points and dollar signs. Looking back, I see it clearly. I wasn't present. Not really. I was there physically. Yes, I provided the roof, the food, the tuition. But I wasn't there when he got his first crush, or when he failed his math quiz and didn't know how to explain it. I didn't teach him how to shave, or talk to girls, or navigate high school politics. I outsourced those moments to teachers, grandparents, and eventually, just the silence of growing up alone. Lucas never acted out. He wasn't the type. He was quiet, responsible, too polite for his own good. Maybe that was my first warning sign. The absence of rebellion in a teenager doesn't always mean things are okay. It sometimes means they've stopped expecting anything from you. I kept telling myself I'd reconnect with him when I retired, that I'd take him fishing like I used to with my dad, that we'd have long conversations over coffee. and bond like those father-son duos you see in feel-good movies. I pictured it all: the laughter, the healing, the second chance. But life doesn't always wait for your schedule. I retired at 49. The industry had shifted, and frankly, I was tired. Tired of pretending concrete mattered more than connection. Tired of using blueprints as a distraction from grief. I came home with plans to cook dinner, to actually attend parent-teacher nights, to drive Lucas to his SAT prep classes instead of just paying for them. But by then, Lucas was 16, and his world had adjusted without me. He had routines I didn't understand, slang I couldn't decode, and a kind of emotional independence that looked mature but felt like distance. I remember once offering to drive him to school, and he looked at me like I'd offered to walk him to class holding hands. Still, I tried. I showed up to his theater performance, front row, smiling like an idiot. He barely acknowledged me afterward. I asked him about his classes. He gave one-word answers. I cooked him breakfast. He took it to his room without saying a word. It hurt more than I ever admitted. So when I met Cheryl, I was hungry for something warm, something affirming. She laughed at my jokes. She asked about my day. She told me I was a good man, even when I didn't believe it myself. And for the first time in years, I felt visible. I thought I could rebuild my family life. This time, with intention. I thought Cheryl could be a bridge between me and Lucas. That maybe, with the right balance of affection and structure, we could all learn to live under the same roof, not just as a convenience, but as a family. I thought wrong. I met Cheryl on a Wednesday evening in a dimly lit community center gymnasium. I'd signed up for a beginner's ballroom class, mostly because my doctor had told me to get moving, and partly because I was tired of eating microwave dinners alone. She was already spinning to the beat when I walked in late, clumsy and self-conscious in shoes that hadn't seen polish in years. She noticed me fumbling with my coat and offered a smile that felt like it belonged in a warmer decade. Cheryl moved like she wasn't afraid of being looked at, confident, graceful, grounded. When we were paired for the foxtrot, she led without making it feel like she was leading. That, in hindsight, was her gift. She told me she was divorced, no kids, worked part-time at a local interior design firm. Her laugh was quick, not the kind you had to earn, and her stories made my world feel slightly less gray. By the third class, we were staying late to practice. By the fifth, we were meeting for coffee before class. 6 months later, we were a couple. A year after that, she moved in. Bringing Cheryl into the house felt like placing a lit candle into a room long left cold. She noticed things: dust in corners, photos with crooked frames, the way I stirred my coffee without sugar, but always checked the jar. She brought warmth into spaces I'd forgotten to care about. She bought new curtains for the kitchen, rearranged the furniture so we could see the sunset from the couch. I didn't mind the changes. It felt like someone was finally taking care of a home I had merely inhabited. Lucas, on the other hand, wasn't as welcoming. He was 16 then, old enough to hide his feelings, but not old enough to manage them well. He didn't say much when I told him Cheryl would be moving in. Just shrugged, said, "Okay," and went back to his phone. But I saw it. The shift in his posture, the way he avoided her eyes at dinner, the barely there smirk when I tried to make small talk about school. It was like he was watching a stranger settle into a seat his mother once held. I expected some resistance. Of course I did. But Cheryl, ever the peacemaker, took it upon herself to close the gap. She started small, leaving post-it notes on his door with bad puns about studying, baking chocolate chip cookies, just the way teenage boys like them, leaving extra room on the couch during movie nights. She asked him about his favorite bands, then played them in the kitchen while cooking. She told him stories about her awkward high school years, the bullies she dealt with, how she once dyed her hair blue to protest cafeteria food. And Lucas slowly began to thaw. I'd come home from a grocery run and hear them laughing in the living room. Once, I walked in on them assembling a shelf together. Cheryl reading instructions, Lucas hammering nails in like he actually cared. She even got him to eat vegetables, which I hadn't managed in a decade. I remember one evening walking into the kitchen and seeing the two of them leaning over a tray of burnt lasagna, both laughing so hard they didn't notice me. Lucas looked up, eyes shining, and said, "Cheryl's banned from cooking now." And she replied, "Only if you're the new head chef, boss." I stood there, half smiling, heart aching in the best way. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was raising a son alone. Finally, I thought, someone's helping me mother him. It felt like a blessing, like I'd found the missing piece Allison left behind. Cheryl didn't try to replace her, but she filled a void neither of us had words for. And Lucas, despite the rocky start, seemed to welcome the attention. He laughed more, ate dinner with us instead of in his room, even started calling her C when teasing her about her obsession with antique teacups. I believed we were building something real, that the three of us, in our clumsy, blended way, were forging a family out of grief and second chances. I believed a lot of things back then. It started with the library card. One afternoon, Cheryl returned from the school office with a stack of enrollment papers and a casual smile. They needed a parent or guardian signature for Lucas's new ID, she said, placing the forms on the kitchen counter. Since I was already there for the PTA meeting, I signed. Hope that's okay. I blinked. Yeah, sure. That's fine. It made sense. She was more available during the day. I didn't see the harm, but then came the tutoring account. Cheryl suggested setting up an online payment profile for Lucas's after-school SAT prep. We can link it to my card, she offered. It's easier to track monthly charges. I nodded. As long as I reimburse you. No need, she said quickly. It's all coming from the same place anyway. Soon, her name appeared on the emergency contact list at school, on the parent email chain, on the extracurricular permission slips, and I, somehow, became the backup number, the silent checkbox. Lucas didn't seem to mind. In fact, he leaned into it. One evening, I came home to find them sitting at the dining table, heads bent over his course schedule. Cheryl thinks I should drop AP History, he said without looking up. I took a seat beside him. Why? You've always loved history. She says it's too much stress with robotics club and college apps. I looked at Cheryl, who gave me a diplomatic smile. He's got a full plate, James. I just suggested he think about balance. I nodded again. Always nodding, always the agreeable one. Right, of course. It became routine. Cheryl made the dentist appointments. Cheryl signed the field trip forms. Cheryl discussed electives with the guidance counselor. I was still the one paying the insurance, writing the tuition checks. But she was the one making the calls, showing up, standing next to him in every picture that mattered. At dinner, she'd bring up his schoolwork before I even had the chance. Lucas got an A on his chem quiz, she'd say proudly, handing him a bowl of mashed potatoes. We spent 2 hours reviewing stoichiometry last night. He'd grin sheepishly. C made me do flashcards until I couldn't see straight. I chuckled, lifting my glass. Well done, both of you. But my voice always felt like a postscript. Even conversation shifted. Lucas used to come to me with questions about girls, teachers, annoying classmates. Now I'd overhear them talking in the kitchen, laughing in a rhythm I couldn't catch up with. Sometimes I'd enter the room, and they'd stop mid-sentence, not out of secrecy, just out of completion. Whatever he needed, she'd already answered. I started to wonder if he needed me at all. One night, I suggested we all watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. Cheryl looked at Lucas. We already started a show, remember? The one I told you about? Lucas nodded. Oh, yeah. Let's finish that first. Maybe next week, Dad? Next week never came. The thing is, there was no malice in Cheryl's actions, no direct affront. She didn't try to replace me in some grand, villainous gesture. She simply filled space I had left vacant for too long. Space that once filled no longer needed reconstruction. And Lucas didn't push me away with anger. He just drifted, gently. Like a boat slipping from its dock when the rope is frayed too thin to hold. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it was just a phase, that teens bonded with whoever showed up consistently. And Cheryl had been consistent. But there were moments, quiet, painful flashes, when I realized I was becoming a guest in my own home. Like the time Lucas was upset after a bad practice and walked past me to find her. Or the morning he got his PSAT scores and showed them to Cheryl first, beaming with pride. Or the way he called her C now, an affectionate nickname I'd never earned. I watched from the sidelines as the two of them formed a rhythm, a shorthand, a connection. And I, once again, told myself to be grateful. That he was loved. That someone was mothering him in the way I couldn't. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the lights were off, I'd lie awake wondering, was I losing him? Or had I already lost him long ago? The notes started showing up on the fridge. At first, they were polite. Small, square, yellow reminders with neat handwriting. Need $80 for physics lab kit. Field trip form on kitchen table. Cheryl says FAFSA deadline is next week. Eventually, they turned curt. Need $200 by Friday. Say T-class, paid. Lunch card refill. No dad, no thanks, no voice. I told myself he was busy, overwhelmed with junior year stress. I told myself all teens retreat, but there was a shift I couldn't ignore, one that crept in like mold behind drywall, silent, spreading. One Saturday morning, I asked Lucas how his robotics competition had gone. He mumbled something without looking up from his phone. I pressed a little. Did you place? He sighed audibly. Can you just ask Cheryl? She knows everything. That one landed like a punch. Cheryl, who hadn't even attended the event, who had just read the updates in the team chat. But Lucas looked at me like I was intruding, like my questions were an inconvenience. Later that day, I found a sticky note stuck to the microwave. Need $450 for prep course extension. No explanation, no conversation, just a dollar sign. I wanted to say something. I thought about sitting him down, reminding him of who I was. Not just the man with the bank account, but the man who had held him through the night when he had chickenpox, who had carried him in his arms from ER to ER when he broke his wrist in 3rd grade. But the words never came. I was afraid of sounding desperate, afraid of hearing the indifference I suspected had already rooted itself in his voice. Cheryl, meanwhile, was managing everything. She kept track of his test dates, checked his grades online, emailed teachers, filled out medical forms. When college application season rolled around, she created a spreadsheet of deadlines color-coded by priority. I was shown the chart over dinner once, then handed a folder of forms to sign. "You don't have to read through all of it," she said cheerfully. "It's standard stuff. I've double-checked everything." I glanced at Lucas. He didn't even look up. So I signed. That became the rhythm. Cheryl organized, Lucas complied, I funded. 3 moving parts: efficient, quiet, impersonal. One evening, as I was reviewing our budget, I noticed an auto transfer I didn't recognize, a payment to a test prep company. I asked Cheryl about it. "Oh, I linked it to your checking last month," she said. "The one Lucas uses for his SAT coaching. You seem swamped with work. Figured it was easier this way." I nodded, but something inside me pulled tight. Not because of the money. I was always willing to pay, but because the decisions, the authority, the role had moved away from me without discussion, like a position reassigned silently during a meeting I'd been excluded from. Lucas started calling me sir when he was upset, not sarcastically, just distant. "Sir, I already told Cheryl." "Sir, we're leaving in 5. "Sir, you don't have to wait up." At first, I thought I was imagining it, that maybe Dad had just slipped his mind, but then I heard it enough times to know it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, cold, a line drawn. I confronted him once. "You used to call me Dad. What changed?" He shrugged. "It's just a word. It's not to me." "Maybe that's the problem," he muttered and walked away. That night, I stared at the wall in our bedroom, Cheryl brushing her teeth behind the door. I felt something collapsing inside me, not an explosion, but a quiet folding in, like a bridge buckling slowly under the weight of neglect. I tried talking to Cheryl. "I feel like I don't know him anymore." She lowered her voice, sympathetic. "He's a teenager, James. Is normal." "No," I said. "This isn't normal. He treats me like a utility." Cheryl hesitated. "Maybe he's still figuring out how to forgive the years you weren't there." I flinched. I was always there financially. "You know that's not the same?" I didn't answer, because she was right. And it hurt more coming from her than if Lucas had screamed it in my face. I wanted to fix it. I just didn't know how. Every gesture felt forced, every conversation awkward, every attempt at closeness met with resistance, or worse, indifference. He lived in my house, ate my food, used my money, but I was no longer his compass, no longer his comfort, just a background presence. One night, I walked past his room and heard him laughing through the door. Cheryl's voice joined in. I stood there for a moment, hand half raised to knock, then lowered it. They didn't need me in that moment. And maybe they hadn't needed me in a long time. It was a Wednesday evening in early November when I found the folder. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a charger in the drawer by the dining table, the one we all used as a catch-all for loose pens, paper clips, and unpaid bills. But instead of a tangle of wires, my hand landed on a thick envelope labeled Admissions Packet, Lucas W. I paused. I knew Lucas had been applying to colleges. I'd written checks for application fees, handed over my social security number for FAFSA, signed things Cheryl had printed. But I hadn't seen the final forms. I hadn't been asked for input on essay topics or campus preferences. I'd told myself it was okay. Kids need independence. Still, Something made me open it. Inside were printed copies of online applications, confirmation emails, and a checklist with schools' names in Cheryl's handwriting. I flipped through the pages, half smiling at the polished presentation. He had come a long way, and then I saw it. Under the Parent-Guardian Information section of the Common App, Primary Guardian, Cheryl Whitaker. Relationship, Stepmother. Secondary Guardian, left blank. I read it again. Cheryl, listed as the primary, and no one else. Not me. My name wasn't there. Not under Parent 1. Not under Emergency Contact. Not under Financial Contributor. It was as if I didn't exist. As if I hadn't been the one to keep the lights on, the fridge full, the tuition paid, the health insurance active. As if Cheryl had raised him alone. I didn't realize I was gripping the paper until my knuckles turned white. I waited until after dinner. Cheryl was in the shower, Lucas in his room. I knocked gently. Yeah? He called without looking up. I stepped in, holding the paper. Can I ask you something? He gave a lazy shrug. Sure. I held up the form. Why is Cheryl listed as your primary guardian? He didn't answer right away, just stared at the screen in front of him, like weighing how much effort to give this conversation. She's the one who's been helping me with all the college stuff, he said finally. That's not what I asked, I replied, keeping my voice even. Why isn't my name there? Why am I not listed at all? He sighed, the way someone does when they've rehearsed a speech and now have to give it. Because you were never there when it mattered. The words weren't shouted. They weren't even angry. They were delivered calmly, like a verdict. I stood still. Lucas turned to face me. Look, you paid for things. I get it. You were generous. But Cheryl showed up. She cared about my essays, my schedule, my sleep. You just signed checks. That's not fair, I said quietly. It's honest. Do you think any of this would be possible without me working my ass off for years? He didn't flinch. No one's denying that. But money isn't parenting. The room felt small, airless. I wanted to yell, to scream that I had sacrificed everything after his mother died, that I had buried my grief in work to give him a future, that I had read every article about single fatherhood, every guide about raising a son without a partner, that I had stayed, that I had never, not once, considered walking away. But he wouldn't hear that. Not now. Maybe not ever. You could have at least listed me, I said, somewhere, as a secondary. Lucas looked at me with something like pity. I didn't think you'd care. That broke me. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. That night, I sat on the porch in the cold. No jacket, just a bottle of water, and a sky full of nothing. I remembered the night he was born, how I had cried harder than Allison when the nurse handed him to me. I remembered the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the way he used to call me Daddy with a lisp. Now I was no one, no name, no box checked. I was paperwork forgotten. Later, Cheryl found me sitting there. You okay? She asked gently. I looked at her and saw the name again on the form. Not James. Cheryl. Primary guardian. Did you know? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He said it'd be simpler. It's not about simple, I said. It's about erasing me. He didn't mean it that way. But he had. And worse, he meant every word he said. Because I wasn't there when it mattered. The next morning, I woke with a hangover of silence. No alcohol involved. Just the heavy ache of being replaced. I sat in the kitchen alone, staring into a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. The folder still sat on the counter where I'd left it. edges slightly curled from being clutched too tightly the night before. The words were still there, printed in clean black ink. Cheryl Whitaker, primary guardian. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe Lucas hadn't thought through the implications. Maybe, just maybe, there was some part of this that made sense. So I called the school. The hold music buzzed in my ear while I watched dust specks float across the morning light. When the administrator picked up, I gave my name, Lucas's full name, date of birth. I asked if I could confirm something on his college application. "Sorry, sir," she said politely. "We only have authorization to discuss Lucas's file with Cheryl Whitaker. She's listed as his sole guardian." I gripped the edge of the counter. There must be some mistake. I'm his father. I understand. But our system reflects what was submitted by the student. Unless Cheryl adds you as an authorized contact, I'm afraid I can't disclose anything further. I thanked her and hung up. The click of the call ending echoed louder than it should have. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, palms flat on the cool marble, trying to make sense of what had happened, of who I'd become in this house, in his life. Not Dad. Not even James. Just someone who paid the bills and got left off the forms. It wasn't just the omission, it was the confirmation. The school didn't know me, didn't recognize my name, my authority, my presence. All those years of planning, paying, protecting, gone with the stroke of a pen and a line left blank. That was when the memories started to surface. All the moments I'd missed. The field trip in second grade, where I'd stayed late at work to hit a deadline. The little league game where I watched the highlights on someone's Facebook post because I was stuck in traffic. The parent-teacher night I postponed for a business dinner, I can't even remember now. Each one came back like a small crack in concrete, minor at first, easy to ignore, until suddenly the foundation gives. Had he been keeping track? Was there a mental ledger in his mind, tallying up every time I wasn't there when it counted? I remembered Allison's funeral, Lucas clinging to my leg, refusing to go near the casket. I'd promised him everything would be okay, that I'd take care of him, that I'd never leave. And maybe I didn't leave, but I didn't really stay either, did I? I told myself work was for him. The long hours, the missed dinners, the sacrifices. It was all to build a future. But maybe what he needed wasn't a college fund or a home in a safe neighborhood. Maybe he just needed someone to sit at the kitchen table and ask him how his day went. I thought of the time he won second place in the middle school science fair. I hadn't gone. Cheryl had. She'd sent me pictures. I thought a picture was enough. It wasn't. That afternoon, I passed by his room. The door was cracked open. He was on a video call laughing. Cheryl's voice drifted from the hallway, humming some old tune while folding laundry. My house, my son, my silence. I didn't knock. I didn't interrupt. I walked outside instead. I sat on the porch again. Same spot as the night before. But this time, I didn't look at the stars. I looked at my hands. Aged, calloused, the same ones that had held Lucas on the day he was born. They looked foreign now, like they belonged to someone else, someone who had mattered once. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice, calm and sharp. You were never there when it mattered. The truth was, I didn't know who I was to him anymore. Was I a relic? A donor? A man who used to be Dad, but had slowly faded into a background role, like a first draft that got revised out of the final version? I used to believe biology meant something. That blood tied us. that a shared last name came with an unspoken bond. But bonds, I was learning, can fray, and names can be omitted. Maybe I wasn't just losing my son. Maybe I was losing the last piece of identity I had left. Move-in day came with cloudless skies and a hint of fall in the air, just crisp enough to signal change, but warm enough to pretend it wasn't happening. We packed the car early that morning. Lucas barely said a word. Cheryl buzzed with the kind of energy you expect from a parent sending a child off to college, adjusting his hoodie, double-checking the snack bag, humming as she folded his acceptance letter into the folder she carried like it was sacred. I carried the heavy things, his mini fridge, the boxes of books, the bedding. I didn't mind. I told myself this was still my role. That strength could compensate for absence. That effort might balance what words couldn't fix. We drove in silence most of the way, Cheryl filling gaps with comments about the campus, the leaves, the future. Lucas nodded, occasionally grunted. I sat in the back seat, my son and his stepmother up front like I was tagging along for a trip I wasn't quite invited to. When we pulled into the student lot, my heart beat louder than the car engine. Rows of volunteers in matching t-shirts were guiding new arrivals with smiles too wide to be real. Families bustled with excitement, parents snapping photos, laughing nervously. I felt old there, unsteady. We unloaded together, though Lucas hardly acknowledged my help. I carried the heaviest boxes to the dorm's front entrance. Cheryl carried his laptop bag and a clipboard with paperwork. A young woman in a staff vest greeted us at the door with a practiced smile. "Welcome. Are you Lucas Whitmore?" Lucas stepped forward. "Yeah." "Perfect. Do you have your ID and housing form?" Cheryl handed them over before Lucas could reach. "Right here." The staff member glanced down at the clipboard, then back at me. "And you are?" "I'm his father," I said, stepping forward. Her smile tightened. "I'm sorry, sir, but only registered guardians are permitted past the security gate. You're not listed." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your name isn't on the guardian access form. Only Cheryl Whitaker is listed." I turned to Cheryl. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I've paid for—" "It's his decision, James," Cheryl interrupted gently, her voice calm but final. "This is how he wanted it." Lucas said nothing. The staff member shifted awkwardly. "We can hold your boxes here if you'd like, or your son can escort them to the room. But you'll need to remain outside the gate." I stood frozen. In front of me, families moved in unison, mothers hugging sons, fathers high-fiving daughters, laughter echoing down the sidewalk. And here I was, being asked to stand behind a gate, in the heat of my own erasure. "I see," I said, my voice tight. "Of course." Lucas took one of the lighter boxes from my arms. Cheryl took another. They walked ahead together without looking back. I stood there, hands empty, breath shallow. A father, a non-participant, a name unlisted. The gate clicked shut behind them. I sat on a nearby bench, pretending to check my phone. Around me, other parents lingered, giving last-minute advice, capturing final photos. I watched a man teach his son how to fold a dorm blanket for storage space. Another woman handed her daughter a handwritten letter for emergencies. Ordinary scenes of farewell. No one noticed me sitting alone. No one saw what was breaking. 15 minutes passed before Cheryl and Lucas returned. Cheryl waved cheerfully. "All set." Lucas gave a slight nod. "Thanks for the ride." That was it. No hug, no handshake, no final glance. They turned back toward the dorm. I remained on the bench, still trying to understand how I'd gone from raising a boy to being left off a form. It was a clean cut, done quietly, but it bled all the same. I sat in the driver's seat for over an hour after they disappeared behind the dorm's double doors. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving, the engine silent. I wasn't waiting for them to come back. I knew they wouldn't. I just didn't know where else to go. The lot had emptied out. The early wave of parents had already cried their goodbyes and headed home with cars full of silence. I remained, parked in a corner space, watching the sky begin its slow crawl toward dusk. And then, without warning, it happened. A sob broke loose from my chest, loud and sudden, and so unfamiliar it scared me. I covered my mouth like I had said something obscene, but it didn't stop. Another came. And another. Until I was hunched forward, forehead on the steering wheel, shaking with a grief I hadn't let myself feel in 2 decades. It wasn't just about today, it was about everything. The night Allison died, I didn't cry. I remember holding her hand until it turned cold, then helping the nurse remove her wedding ring. I remember calling the funeral home, signing papers, arranging meals, all with mechanical precision. People said I was strong. I told myself I had to be. For Lucas, even at her burial, when Lucas clung to my leg and asked why Mommy wasn't waking up, I didn't shed a tear. I told him she was sleeping, that angels were watching. Then I tucked him into bed that night and sat in the hallway until sunrise. But today, watching him walk away, leaving me on the other side of that gate, something inside me collapsed, and I let it. The memories came rushing in like floodwater. Lucas in his first Halloween costume, dressed as a tiny pirate, shouting "Arr!" with a plastic sword. Me, holding his hand through a parking lot, lifting him into the shopping cart seat, pretending it was a spaceship. I remembered the time he got the flu and couldn't sleep through the night. I sat by his bed, placing cold rags on his forehead, reading books aloud until he dozed off mid-sentence. I didn't move for hours, afraid he'd wake up scared and alone. There was the day he tripped on the soccer field and split his chin open. I left work in the middle of a meeting, drove straight to the clinic, and held his hand as they stitched him up. He squeezed my fingers so tightly I couldn't feel them for an hour afterward. The memory that hurt most came quietly. A rainy morning in first grade. He was nervous about a spelling test. I made pancakes shaped like letters, A, B, C, and told him he was going to crush it. He hugged me before getting on the bus, arms tight around my neck. "You're the best daddy," he'd whispered. That boy, that little boy, had once looked at me like I was his whole world. And now? Now he couldn't even say goodbye. Now I was the man outside the gate. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the ceiling of the car, trying to breathe. What had I done wrong? Where had I lost him? Maybe it was all the times I said, "Not now, buddy," when I was on a work call. Maybe it was skipping the school play because of a deadline. Maybe it was missing those years when he still believed I knew everything, back before I started proving I didn't. I thought love meant providing. That if the lights stayed on, the fridge stayed full, the tuition got paid, it meant I was doing my job. But Lucas had never needed another provider. He'd needed a father. And somewhere between grief and ambition, between fear and fatigue, I had faded into a shadow version of the man he once hugged with certainty. I thought of Cheryl's voice earlier. "It's his decision, James." And I realized it was. He had made a decision. He had redrawn the lines, and I wasn't inside them anymore. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket, ashamed of how broken I felt. A grown man crying in a parking lot because his son had outgrown him, or worse, had no use for him. But pain has a way of clarifying, because in that moment, something shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a slow burning awareness. If I had been erased, maybe it was time I stopped trying to write myself back in. By the time I got home that evening, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to call him. I wasn't going to send a care package. I wasn't going to drive back up for parent weekend or check if he needed money for books. I would cancel the monthly allowance transfer quietly. Not out of punishment, but because I had finally accepted something I should have known years ago. I wasn't needed. I moved through the house like a ghost. Cheryl wasn't back yet. Maybe she stayed to help him unpack. Maybe she was out celebrating. I didn't care. I didn't want to see her. Not after the gate. Not after that look in her eyes. A calm assurance that everything had gone according to plan. I went to the office, the one room in the house that still felt like mine, and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure why. Maybe out of habit. Maybe to forward some tax forms to my accountant. Maybe just to feel like I was still part of something functional. My email loaded slowly. The inbox, cluttered with newsletters and confirmations, pulsed with unread messages. I clicked through them absently until one thread caught my eye. Lucas move-in day. Follow up. It wasn't addressed to me. It was a forwarded thread, sent by mistake, it seemed, to my primary account. Cheryl must have clicked the wrong name. The subject line didn't matter. What mattered was the sender. The name, Marla Gaines. Cheryl's best friend. Curious, I opened it. At the top, a message from Cheryl. Everything went exactly as planned. Lucas was calm, confident. James looked gutted, but he didn't cause a scene, so that's a win. Underneath it, Marla's reply. He still thinks this is Lucas's decision? Classic. You've been reshaping that boy's mind for 3 years, and he still gives the kid credit. I swear, you're a genius at the long game. My hand froze on the mouse. I reread it. Then again. Each word hit like a slow drip of acid, reshaping that boy's mind for 3 years. The implication wasn't subtle. Cheryl hadn't simply supported Lucas's choices. She'd orchestrated them, quietly, deliberately. And I, the idiot, had stood by, mistaking her manipulations for maternal warmth. There were more messages, each one worse than the last. He's finally stopped questioning things. When I brought up the guardian forms, he didn't even blink. Honestly, I thought James would fight harder, but maybe he's more broken than we thought. It's better this way. Lucas sees me as the stable one, the one who's always been there. You can't compete with consistency. I leaned back in my chair, blood draining from my face. It wasn't just that she had lied. It was that she had calculated. The nicknames, the bonding moments, the inside jokes, all part of a campaign. I remembered Lucas calling her C, laughing at her jokes, sharing secrets I never heard. I thought it was affection. It was grooming. She had been positioning herself as the emotional epicenter of his world, slowly pushing me to the margins until I didn't even appear on the page. And I had let her. I'd opened the door. I'd handed her the forms. I'd stood aside at every moment she stepped forward, because I believed her when she said it was about helping, but it was always about replacing. I stared at the screen, mind spinning. Rage boiled under the surface, but beneath that, something colder took root. Clarity. She wanted to win. Not just love Lucas, but to win him, to reshape his loyalty, his story, his memory of what a father was. And she had nearly succeeded, but she'd made one mistake. She forgot I still had a voice, not in his inbox, not on his application, not at his gate, but here, in the truth. I closed the email, heart pounding. I wasn't going to disappear. Not anymore. I didn't react immediately. That's what Cheryl would have expected. Some emotional outburst, some confrontation in the kitchen with raised voices and hurt feelings. But I wasn't going to give her that. This wasn't about catharsis. It was about correction. The next morning, I made coffee the way I always did. Black, no sugar. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the bank portal. The monthly transfers to Lucas's student account, the auto payments for housing, the textbook stipend, line by line. I canceled each one. It took all of 5 minutes. I stared at the screen for a moment before logging out, half expecting some flood of regret. It didn't come. Just silence. A clear, clean silence. Then I opened my email. I drafted a short message to the financial aid office at Lucas's university. No anger, no explanation. Just a formal request. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing my financial support and guardianship authorization for Lucas Whitmore. Please update your records accordingly. All future funding must be sourced independently. Regards, James Whitmore. I reread it once, then hit send. Done. That afternoon, I received confirmation. Lucas would be notified. The university required alternative funding within 2 weeks, or a financial hold would be placed on his enrollment. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled. Not with satisfaction, not with spite, but with a strange calm I hadn't felt in years. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I'd played the role of invisible benefactor long enough. The first call came that evening. Cheryl. I let it ring. Then the text started. James, what did you do? I just got a notice from the university. We need to talk. This isn't fair to Lucas. Please don't take this out on him. At least give me the courtesy of a conversation. I muted my phone. I wasn't interested in a conversation with someone who thought manipulating a child's memory was strategy, who thought replacing a father was just a long game well played. Later that night, a voicemail arrived. Her voice sounded calm, but under it, panic. I know you're angry, but Lucas doesn't know about the emails. He doesn't see it the way you do. Pulling funding now? It's cruel, James. He's just a kid. I listened once, then deleted it. Because Lucas wasn't a kid. Not anymore. He was 18, old enough to erase a parent from official records, old enough to say, you were never there when it mattered, old enough to choose a version of the truth that suited him. He was also old enough to find his own way forward. I hadn't stopped loving him, but I'd stopped enabling the lie. For days, I heard nothing from him, just silence. The same silence I'd lived in for years, except now. It was mutual. And then 4 days later, he called. I didn't answer. He called again, left a voicemail this time. His voice was uncertain, less assured than usual. Hey, I got your message. I don't know why you did this. Cheryl says you're upset, but I don't get it. If you're trying to punish me, just say it. But don't ghost me like this. He sounded angry, confused, a little scared. I listened to that one twice, not because I wanted to comfort him, but because I wanted to hear, in his tone, the realization beginning to form. That actions have consequences. That guardianship isn't just a line on a form. It's a bond. And when you cut it, Something bleeds. That weekend, Cheryl showed up at the house. I didn't answer the door. She knocked for 10 straight minutes, then drove away. I spent the day gardening. The weeds had overtaken the backyard during the fall. The soil was dry, tough to break. But the rhythm of digging, pulling, discarding, it grounded me. This wasn't revenge. It was release. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was finally done hurting myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Cheryl finally lost her composure. I had just returned from the hardware store, a bag of mulch in one hand and a cold bottle of iced tea in the other, when I saw her car already parked in front of the house. She stood by the porch with her arms folded, foot tapping, her usual calm gone, replaced by a tense rigidity that didn't bother masking the fury underneath. "You need to stop this," she said the moment I stepped onto the walkway. "Afternoon to you too," I replied, brushing past her toward the door. She followed me in without waiting for an invitation. "Don't pretend this is about dignity or boundaries," she snapped. "This is about control. You're punishing Lucas because he chose me. And now you're taking away his future because your pride got bruised." I dropped the bag on the kitchen floor and turned slowly. "He didn't choose you, Cheryl. He forgot me. And you encouraged it," she scoffed. "You're unbelievable. You disappear for most of his life, then waltz back in and expect loyalty like it's your birthright." I never disappeared. I was there every damn day, paying the bills, covering the medical expenses, paying for the school trips, the braces, the camps. I kept this house running when grief nearly tore it apart. "Money isn't love," she spat. "And manipulation isn't motherhood," I shot back. Her eyes narrowed. "So this is about the emails." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Cheryl stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You took one comment, one private exchange, and built a narrative out of it. You want to believe I schemed my way into his heart. But the truth is simpler, James. I showed up. You didn't." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not the warm, supportive partner I once trusted, but someone who had mastered the art of taking space that didn't belong to her and making it look like grace. "I'm not removing support," I said. "I'm removing illusion." That stopped her. "This whole family dynamic," I continued, "was built on assumptions. That I was too tired to object, too distracted to notice. That love was measured by convenience. Well, no more. If Lucas wants to build a life without me, I'll respect that. But I'm not going to bankroll my own erasure." Cheryl's face hardened. "You're cruel." "No," I said, stepping forward. "I'm finally honest." She didn't reply. After a long moment, she turned and walked out the door, heels echoing against the floor like the closing of a final argument. The silence after she left was thick. I poured myself a glass of water and stared out the kitchen window. The yard looked better, less wild, more controlled. It felt like the only thing in my life I'd managed to shape the way I intended. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Lucas, a single text. "Can we meet?" I stared at it, unsure how to feel. It had been months since he'd reached out directly. Even longer since he'd asked for my time, not my money. "When and where?" I replied. He answered immediately. "Tomorrow. Same diner. After class." I didn't sleep well. I lay awake, trying to imagine how the conversation would go. Would he yell? Would he accuse me of abandonment? Would he ask me to explain myself or apologize? Or would he sit across from me and look like a stranger I once used to love? By morning, I still didn't know what I would say. But I knew this much. It was the first time he had initiated a meeting without Cheryl. And for the first time in years, it would be just the two of us. No gate, no guardianship form, no proxy between our names. Just a father and a son, sitting across from each other, trying to see what was left. The diner was quiet, the kind of midweek lull that made the air feel heavier. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a booth by the window. I didn't want us boxed in. I needed space to breathe, to think, to watch his face under natural light when the moment came. Lucas walked in right on time. Same hoodie, same slouched posture, earbuds dangling from one ear. He scanned the room, spotted me, and gave a nod before sliding into the booth across from me. "Hey," he said flatly. "Hey." The waitress came over. We ordered coffee, nothing more. Neither of us wanted to pretend this was a meal. This wasn't catching up. This was confrontation wrapped in pleasantries. Lucas looked out the window, then down at the table. "I don't really know where to start." "You reached out," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "That's a start." He nodded, tapped his fingers against the formica surface. I don't get it. Cutting off support like that? It felt like punishment?" I interrupted. Like I was suddenly being cruel, vindictive? He shrugged. "Yeah." I reached into my coat and pulled out a manila envelope. I placed it on the table between us. His eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Proof," I said quietly, "of what really happened, of who made which decisions." He hesitated, then picked it up, slid out the pages. His hands were steady at first, until they weren't. He read the top line aloud under his breath. "You've been reshaping that boy's mind for 3 years." His eyes stopped moving. His lips pressed into a tight line. He flipped through the pages, faster now. Each email between Cheryl and Marla laid bare, without commentary, just time-stamped manipulation dressed as maternal care. I let the silence stretch. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "You went through her email?" "No," I said. "She accidentally sent the thread to me. I guess she was too confident to double-check." Lucas stared down at the pages again. I didn't know she said these things." "No," I replied. "You didn't, because she didn't want you to." I reached into the envelope and pulled out one final piece of paper. A Post-it note, my handwriting in block letters. "You still think it was your choice?" I slid it across the table. He didn't touch it, just stared at it like it was on fire. "I never wanted you to pick sides," I said, voice low. "I never wanted to be the dad who begged for attention or fought for loyalty like it was custody court all over again. But when I saw that guardian form, when I saw my name erased, I accepted it. I told myself you were old enough to choose, that maybe I'd earned your distance." Lucas said nothing. "But then I read those emails," I continued, "and I realized you didn't make that decision alone. You were guided, nudged, conditioned." He finally spoke. "I'm not stupid, Dad. I knew Cheryl cared about me. I knew she was more involved. I didn't think she was planning it. She wanted to replace me," I said. "Not just in the house, in your head, in your memory." He sat back, hands still on the pages. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" "Because I didn't want to look like the bitter ex. I didn't want to tell you how to feel. I thought maybe if I stayed out of the way, you'd come back on your own." He looked down again, then up. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. He nodded slowly, then ran a hand through his hair. What happens now? I exhaled. That's up to you. He folded the papers, carefully this time, and slid them back into the envelope. Then he looked me in the eye. I need time, he said. I know. But I want to figure this out, without her. I nodded. I'd like that. We sat there a while longer, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us, saying nothing. But the silence was different now. Not heavy, not hostile, just real. The university confirmed it within a week. Lucas had withdrawn from the semester. Officially, the reason was personal family matters. But I didn't need a statement to know the truth. He wasn't running away. He was slowing down, processing, trying to see the pieces of his life not as they had been handed to him, but as they actually were. I heard about the job from a mutual friend of Cheryl's. A bookstore downtown, minimum wage, quiet hours. Perfect for someone trying to rebuild a sense of autonomy. He didn't tell me about it directly. I didn't press. That was our rhythm now. Space, with intention, not avoidance. 3 months after that diner meeting, Cheryl packed her things and left. It didn't come with a fight or a dramatic exit. No shouting. No doors slammed. Just a long silence, and then a note left on the kitchen counter. I hope someday we both find peace. She didn't say goodbye to Lucas, at least not in person. I heard later she sent an email, but he never mentioned it. Whatever illusion she had built finally collapsed under the weight of exposure. And when control slipped from her hands, she did the one thing she hadn't done in years: let go. The house, once so carefully arranged with her touches, lavender-scented candles, color-coded storage bins, chore charts on the fridge, felt empty in a strange but welcome way. Lucas visited a few times after she left. Not for long, not every week, but enough. He never said much. Sometimes he helped me in the yard. Sometimes we watched old basketball games in silence. Sometimes we sat on the porch like 2 men learning to breathe again. The conversations were light. Weather, work, the neighbor's ugly fence, but they carried weight. We were relearning how to exist in the same space without blame. Eventually, I made the decision I'd been quietly turning over in my mind for years. I sold the house and moved back to the town where I grew up. It wasn't dramatic. No boxes hastily packed, no tearful goodbyes. Just a quiet listing, a few showings, and a final walk through the empty rooms. I didn't tell Lucas I was leaving until the day before the movers arrived. He stood in the garage, arms crossed, brow furrowed. So that's it? No, I said. It's not goodbye. It's just new soil. He didn't hug me. He didn't cry. But before I pulled out of the driveway, he placed something in the passenger seat, a photo of the 2 of us at his 6th birthday party, me holding him on my shoulders, both of us grinning, frosting smeared across our faces. I want you to keep this, he said, so neither of us forgets who we were, before all the noise. I nodded, unable to speak. Now, 6 months later, I live in a modest house near the woods. Mornings are slow. The air smells like pine, and the silence feels earned rather than forced. I tend a small garden. I walk the trails. I read the books I once shelved and forgot about. And sometimes, just before bed, my phone buzzes. A text from Lucas. Usually simple. You'd like this article? What's your take on this movie? Saw a dad and kid building a treehouse today. Thought of you. We're not whole. We're not, but we're healing. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when he showed up. No warning, no call. Just the sound of a car pulling up the gravel driveway and a knock at the front door that felt like it had traveled 1,000 miles to get here. I opened it, and there he was, Lucas. Taller, leaner than I remembered, with a scruff of facial hair and a jacket too light for the weather. He looked like someone still figuring things out, which is to say, he looked like a man. He didn't say hello, didn't offer a handshake or a smile. Instead, he stepped inside, walked past me without a word, and set something down on the kitchen table, a folded piece of paper. I followed, heart thudding like it used to when he was a boy, and I knew he'd done something, but didn't know what yet. He gestured at the paper. Read it. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't long, just a few lines, written in the same handwriting I used to see on school permission slips and thank you cards he'd been forced to write as a kid. If you're free tomorrow, let's have dinner. Just you and me. I looked up, stunned. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. You cooking, or am I? I asked, voice softer than I expected. His lips twitched into the faintest smile. I'll pick up something. We stood there in silence, both of us unsure what to say next. The kitchen was small, the kind built for one-person meals and late-night tea. But in that moment, it held enough room for forgiveness to begin. He sat down, looked around the place. You really moved out here. Needed some peace, I said. He nodded slowly. I get that. There was no dramatic speech, no emotional breakthrough, no long confessions, just presence. After a moment, he pulled something else from his pocket. A photograph, crinkled, worn. It was the same picture he'd given me on the day I moved. The one of us at his 6th birthday. The one I kept on my nightstand. I made a copy, he said. Didn't want to lose it. I reached for the kettle, needing to do something with my hands. You've been okay? Learning, he said. Making mistakes, trying to fix what I can. That's all any of us can do. He nodded again, eyes on the window now, watching the wind move through the trees. The moment felt impossibly fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of a shelf. I don't know how to be good at this, he said suddenly. At being your son again. You don't have to be good at it, I replied. You just have to show up. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't leave either. That was enough. As he stood to go, he looked back at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen in him before. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Don't make me eat alone. I raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't dream of it. He left without another word, but as the door closed behind him, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. It wasn't a resolution, it wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, that's more than enough.